Okay, welcome to the next edition of That Digital Village show. Today we have special guest, Danielle Owen Whitford from Pioneera. She's the CEO and founder there. Pioneera uses AI to help identify and prevent burnout in employees. In 2021, Pioneera was recognized as a world-changing idea by Fast Company. And in 2022, you won the social impact category for the Australian Good Design Awards. This is getting intimidating. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Luke. Thanks, Josh.
Yes, I'm Luke, and today we have Josh, Digital Village MD as well, representing in the shirt. Thank you for that, mate.
Thank you.
It's good to see.
Yeah.
That's good.
So, we're super looking forward to talking about Pioneera and hearing more about that and what you've been up to. But first, it's been quite a journey for you. Massive, barnstorming corporate career. You were executive GM of transformation?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
At a national insurer.
Yeah.
And then you made the jump into running a startup, founding and running a startup.
Yeah.
What happened there?
Yeah. Not quite as a straight line as it sounds, Luke, actually. But yeah, so my background is retail networks, call centres and large-scale transformation. And I was Executive General Manager of Transformation for a very large insurance company, who shall remain nameless, and loved it, loved everything that we did. And particularly that we could add a lot of value to our customers and develop people along the way. But I didn't see any of the warning signs of burnout, so burnt out myself in 2016, very unexpectedly. And I wasn't hidden away in the organisation. I was quite visible. I reported to the executive team.
High-profile role.
Yeah, I was in front of the board, and yet none of us saw any of the warning signs. So I up and left one day. I just thought I couldn't do it anymore, and then started to reflect on my situation and what had happened, started talking to other people, realised it wasn't uncommon what I had experienced, it just wasn't talked about, and then started looking at the research to say, well, was there a way that this could have been prevented? And I realised that there was an opportunity in language to see that someone's starting to escalate and then intervening, because there's always a path. You just need to see those warning signs on the path. And so I thought, oh, you know what, I could just build that. Why not? I'm not a technology person, but why don't I just create a spell checker for stress? Microsoft's done it. Surely that can't be so hard. Rolling my eyes for those that are listening, and then started down a startup path. So I met a woman who was running an accelerator program specifically for non-technical female founders wanting to solve large global problems. And I said to her, I've got this concept. And she's like, oh my God, that's a startup. And I said, what's a startup? Like a true corporate gal. And so there, 5 years ago, went into the She Starts program and then started building Pioneera from there.
Can I just go back? So when you're experiencing burnout as an employee, and then you thought, and then there's the next step of like, I'm going to solve this. What was currently there in place at the time that you experienced within the workplace where you were like, oh, they had some tools, but they weren't. Was there? You obviously saw the problem, but what was there as a solution before you jumped into Pioneera?
The solutions actually are very similar to what we have today. So organisations have surveys, they have wellbeing programs. There's probably more wellbeing programs today than there were then, and they have employee assistance programs. And really there was a lot of reliance on the manager to identify that someone had something going on and help them. And what I observed then the problem statement, to your point, was that none of those tools were able to see someone was escalating in real time. Surveys are point in time. Everything else requires an individual to know that they need help and then know where to get the help. And that's the breakdown point, because where the psychology research tells us that unconscious bias also relates to ourselves, and we don't see that our state needs a bit of help unless a third party says, hey, how are you going? And that's why Are You OK Day has been so powerful, because another person says, how are you going? And so that was the problem I was trying to solve. How do you see someone needs help in real time? How do you get them the right help in real time? And how do you make sure that's private and confidential to them? Because nobody wants their boss or HR to know that they're struggling.
No. There was the Future of Work report, I think, that looked at stress and burnout in the workplaces, and Australia has about 81 or 82% of people experiencing that, but 50% of those people like never really say anything about it, or they prefer to keep it secret.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is something that people are very conscious of, and I'm curious about how you went around actually talking to people about it.
Yeah, I think the one benefit of having a relatively long corporate career is I had a pretty good network. So I just kind of started calling up people that I'd worked with, friends of mine, was conscious to try and get a broad perspective. And someone had said to me early, people like you, so they'll tell you what they want, what you want to hear. So I started reaching out to people that I didn't know as well, or having, referrals, people connect to me, and then just talking to people, like, really honest conversations about how they were feeling. And so it became very, very quickly, like literally within maybe 5 or 6 conversations, it became clear the problem was the same. The problem that people didn't see the issue, but then also they didn't feel safe to ask for help. They didn't feel confident that it wasn't going to negatively impact their career. So they didn't say anything. There was just a lot of fear and shame associated with it. And I don't think that's changed. We talk more about mental health now than we did before, but as it relates to an individual and the impact on the individual, I think that fear and shame is still there.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And so maybe jumping forward a little bit, but I'm curious, how do you go about, I guess, maintaining that confidentiality and that anonymity? Because it is important for people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it is not an understatement to say that we're obsessed with privacy and confidentiality, actually, because without that, there's no trust. And without trust, no one uses the system to their benefit. So we've got privacy and confidentiality at a number of levels, but for an employee or a user of the system, that can be an employee or a manager. Everything that they do is private and confidential. So nobody sees their private and confidential data except for them. And managers can only see aggregated anonymised groups. And the biggest thing we introduced last year, which was a game changer for us, was consent and opt-in. So if an organisation buys the product, they invite whoever they want to use it, but the employee has to opt in and consent. And that's been a huge step forward for us, but also for employees, and feeling that they have some power and that they have a decision agency, really, in using the system. So that's how we manage that. And that has proven to be extremely successful.
Yeah, what was happening before then? Before consent?
So before then, managers or organisations could buy the system and implement it, and we were always very transparent. So the second they put Indie, the app's called Indie, they put Indie in, Indie would announce itself and say, hey, I'm Indie, this is what I'm here to do. So you could never be big brothered. People would say, can you big brother me? You could never be big brothered because it was always announced. But you didn't necessarily get the choice about whether or not you want it there. And now you have the choice about whether or not you want it to work, and it works much more on a one-on-one level.
Yeah, okay.
Sure. And so just how does that work actually? So Indie is announcing itself. Where is it announcing itself? What's the actual mechanism there?
Yeah. So Indie's it's an app. So it's a Microsoft Teams or a Slack app, and it connects to Teams or Slack and works like a spell checker. So when you opt in, it appears as an app in Teams or in Slack, and it uses what you do in that system really to understand your mental state and then see, what sort of coaching or what sort of support that you need. So it's fully in the flow of work, no disruptions for individuals. And as I said, it's private and confidential. So Indie will DM you in that channel if it thinks you need something, or to coach you. So that way no one's seeing it. Your boss isn't seeing it. HR's not seeing it. It just DMs directly to you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm wondering whether people change, like knowing that Indie sits over the top of Slack or Teams, whether they actually change how they communicate as well.
We've not seen a lot of evidence of that. We looked for it really closely in the beginning, and we kind of called it the reality TV effect, because people would know it was there for a while, and then after like a couple of hours, they'd forget and go about their everyday work.
It's a bit like me holding this microphone.
Like a little bit. You're making it look. I think also because the way we roll it out, so, being transformation, I spend a lot of time helping people move to a different future. And so we've put a lot of, processes, and not really process, but we've got steps in place now to help bring people on the journey. And the most important first step is showing them what their manager sees. And I do that straight up. I'm like, this is what your manager sees.
Yeah, that's
and they
great.
go, oh, oh, hang on, okay, well, there's no individual, there's no sentence in there that identifies me. And as soon as they see that, then they become curious about, oh, could this work for me? So that process again has really engaged
Probably a
people.
lot more comfortable too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
that's really good.
Yeah, fantastic. So, just in terms of that transformation, when you're going to organizations and talking about, well, this is who we are, this is what we do, and this is how it works, and you're saying you're presenting that future to them, what is the future that you present?
Yeah, really good question. Our objective really is to create well-beings, but in the back of my head, I just want to change work because we go to work and it's a means to an end for a lot of people, and it's tough. And I think we can make it a bit better. So that's our objective really, is to make work better. So that's the future we paint for organisations where they're using the technology and the AI for good, and the technology is actually augmenting their management. It's augmenting their people. It's not replacing people, but it really is like a coach. And I talk about the fact that we use spell checker now for our, Grammarly, if we're, or autocorrect, whichever one you use. We don't remember phone numbers anymore because they're in our phone. So
Yeah.
why would we not allow ourselves the support around, burnout prevention and stress that a coach like this can provide? So that's kind of the future that I say, look, in future, I expect that the cognitive load it's taking to manage our own mental state can be done with this technology as like a kind of mate of yours. And then that way, individuals are more productive, they're more creative, they're more innovative, they're more connected to the organisation, and then the organisation prospers. So the organisation performs, higher shareholder performance, blah, blah, blah. Everyone wants to work there. So the war for talent becomes much easier because you're an organisation that people want to work with. So that's kind of the future we paint for organisations, that they can achieve quite simply, I believe, but not always
Yes.
as simple as it could be.
Yeah, that sounds really, really good. And I guess, is that the vision that most organizations want? Do you think? Do you think there's any kind of tension
That's a really
around,
good question.
like, oh, yes, we want our people to be happy, but can't we just make them work hard as well?
Yeah, I think organisations want strong commercial outcomes.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
want to perform commercially really strongly. And they will do mostly whatever is required to get to that outcome. I think on the whole, everyone understands, like, intellectually, the importance of well-being and
Yeah.
connection and stuff, but actually translating it from the intellectual, I think this is important, to the practical to get an outcome is a really big gap. So most people, I think, in organisations do default to, can't they just work a bit harder, like,
Yeah.
or pay more?
When will I see this on the bottom line?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They need to pay them more. They think they need to pay them more because, yes, they want to see it on the bottom line. So the approach we've taken is kind of both sides of the coin, and we look at how we reduce costs because that's kind of important. But then we're also looking at how we can improve revenue or how we can improve performance. So a couple of our clients we've got now are quite interested in that. So we're trying to develop some use cases that links wellbeing to productivity to profitability. So then we can say to organisations, okay, you want to increase revenue? Here's a way of doing that. And I don't know any organisation that says no to
Yeah.
improving revenue.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to ask that question around ROI and going in, whether it's as part of that sales process that you're talking to potential customers or during, a customer's journey with Pioneera. Are you able to show that return on investment at the moment, or what sort of things are you showing around that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of, so from a hard measure point of view, we've seen increases in engagement, we've seen a reduction in burnout, improvements in productivity. So it's kind of hard measures that we have. And a couple of our clients now, we're doing more focused and specific use cases. So we can, put those numbers against it.
Like a dollar value.
Like a dollar
Yeah.
value, absolutely. And a percentage value, productivity uplift, and equals this in terms of dollars. So that's what we're working through. And also using other measures. So measures that might be sales results or, GitHub closes or whatever. So you can put some tactical measures against it. So we're doing that with a couple of clients now. But the other thing is we've seen quite an interesting impact on the intangibles. And I'd like to say I'm smart enough to have thought of this up front, but I didn't. things like collaboration, connection, engagement.
Yeah.
Putting an app like Indie in, which is specifically about, well-being, burnout, productivity, it creates a language and permission for people to start talking about stuff they hadn't before.
Yeah.
And that's been quite interesting to see across the team. And one of the earlier teams we worked with, I remember I sat in a meeting where they said to the manager, "What does Indie say?" And I was like, "Oh, that's
awesome."
interesting." Yeah, and I think they did it because no one wanted to speak up. Like it's tough to speak up in And I was like, "Okay, that's really interesting." So that's been quite an impactful.
That's great.
Actually.
Yeah.
Been quite impactful.
Yeah, that's great.
It's quite funny. I've seen that effect in other domains as well, particularly around code quality. It's very hard to criticize your mates' work, but and say, "Hey, the tool says this is terrible."
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's not me.
Yeah.
Exactly. And some people have been really, like some people are very, keep it very close to their chest. Others have been super open. So I've, again, sitting in meetings where someone's like, "Oh my God, Indy keeps telling me to meditate." And we don't do that anymore, by the way, BT Dubs. And then other guys like, "Indy's telling me to eat healthy. What does Indy know that I'm eating?" Like, it was quite funny. They were all comparing Indy notes. And then another client of ours, one of the leaders, because we provide a dashboard so you can have a look at your stress and wellness in real time and look at your trends if you're interested. He took a snapshot of his dashboard and his stress and wellbeing trends and sent it out to the team, which was super interesting. So different people will kind of deal with it differently. So, it's been fascinating.
Yeah, and so I guess that's all sort of like moving towards that, like opening up that conversation around like burnout and what it is and what the effects of it are, and just going back to the ROI thing. I mean, if somebody does like have properly burn out at work, they're out for how long?
On average 26 weeks.
26.
So
Wow,
the most recent data from Comcare talked about something like 40% of workers' compensation claims are due to stress, workplace stress, so the mental health claims, workers' compensation, and people are out for an average of 26 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's significant.
That's massive.
Yeah, it's massive.
Particularly as you're talking about, knowledge roles, which have a much higher salary base. So that impact is not just long term; it's a higher impact.
And this is covered under workers' compensation, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And so there's like, to an extent, there's large organisations have this duty of care, don't they?
Yeah. Well, not only does it impact their insurance premiums, so that becomes very expensive, but secondly, the government has now changed the Fair Work Australia regulations to include mental health as well as physical health. So organisations had a requirement, to your point of duty of care, to create a physically safe workplaces. So, the slips, trips and falls. I'm sure you've all seen the posters and stuff everywhere.
Yes.
Now there's a requirement for organisations to create a psychosocial safety, which is the social and environment that people work within needs to be safe for that person. And that now, it's a regulation, it's a requirement that organisations deliver that, and they have to show how they're delivering that. And so it's a completely different ballgame now for organisations, because it now has become a risk issue, becomes a people risk issue that they need to
They need to all have Indie.
They need to all have Indie, exactly. They need to all have Indie. That would be the solution.
I'm sure that's going to like headline it for a lot of large organisations that do have people like looking. It's their job to make sure that those kinds of risks are being covered off. Do you find that it's different sort of approaching smaller organisations that may not have that kind of focus?
Yeah, smaller organisations in two ways. Firstly, they don't have the resources that large organisations have. So it's not like, we all know we're small businesses. It's not like anyone's sitting around waiting to do this. You're running and you're trying to do so much. So there's a huge lack of capacity in smaller organisations. But also a lot of smaller organisations aren't even aware of this. So when I'm talking to them about their requirements as an employer now, they're like, "What? What do you mean?"
Yeah.
And so I can't tell you how many times I've sent out things. So now we just created a blog and we put it all in a blog, and I send it to them and I say, "Here's the things that you should know." So they're not even aware of the requirement, and they're not aware of how they deal with it, because they haven't had the leadership training that lots of big organisations,
So it's an educational piece for them.
It's an educational piece. So Indie helps tick all of those boxes for them. So it's a cost-effective digital solution that can keep them compliant. And that's when they go, "Oh, okay." So I joked with a small SME the other day, your accountant keeps you out of jail from a, finance
Yes.
perspective, and we can keep you out of jail from a people perspective.
Okay, that's great. So are you using Pioneera internally?
We do.
Pioneera?
We do. We use Indy, and we use our positive productivity score, which is our measure of productivity for knowledge roles.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And with those smaller organizations, you're talking to people about their awareness, around that kind of thing. Do you find that you have to be a bit of an educator around burnout as well?
We do. We have to be an educator around burnout. We have to be an educator around performance. We do a bit of leadership coaching because a lot of the time the leaders don't know what to do with the data, best of intents, like they want to do some good stuff, but they're not quite sure how. So we do a bit of work there. And the beauty of using the product is we start to see what happens for us that then I can share with others. So an example is, I was looking at my team's data a couple of weeks ago and I saw lots of weekend work. So I pulled the team together. We have a Monday get together, and I showed the dashboard to the team and I said, let's talk about this, everyone. Is it that we've just got like deliverables that we need to do in the next couple of weeks? Or is it that we've got so much work we've just decided that there's 6 days in the week? And they said it's the latter. And I said, well, that's not okay. So let's reprioritize. So we prioritized, and that was good. The weekend working went away because I wasn't aware they were working on the weekend.
Yeah.
And then a couple of weeks, like actually last week, I was sick last week. I wasn't in the office. The leadership team realized they were heading towards that again, and they prioritized themselves. They pulled it up and said, we need to prioritize. So they prioritized, and they said, Dan, this is what we've done. And I was like, I was super proud of them because,
that's great.
they did that without me, which is, ultimately what you want. And it was because the data started to show them that. So we can use those examples, and they're very tangible examples for small business owners. They go, oh, okay, actually, I get this. This is not complex. I can do that one thing. And I show them in the data where to look for productivity. Okay, if this is the day that's productive, what are you doing to enhance that? They go, oh, yeah, I can do that. So we keep it simple so they can implement it.
I was surprised there wasn't an option C in there of, I love my work so much that I just want to work.
I never want to stop.
Yeah, I just want to work 6 days.
Oh, I did give them that option, actually. I didn't give them. They are very passionate. We have an amazing team. They're very passionate.
Yeah, that's great.
It could have been a little bit of that. Still, I still want them to have a break because we know that overwork is one of the key inputs. So burnout kind of has a couple of hallmarks. One is overwork. You just simply work yourself into the ground. The other one is overwhelm. So emotionally, mentally, there's stuff going on. And there's so many people in overwhelm right now because of coming off the back of COVID and the challenges economically and, lots of downsizing happening. So there's a lot of overwhelm right now. And then the third thing is something going on outside of work that then, people are coming into work carrying whatever's happening and that some trauma in their personal life. And where we see burnout manifest, this is anecdotally from my observation, is really where the work and the personal life sort of collide. So people are going along at work, they're doing a lot, they're feeling slightly overwhelmed, but they're okay. Something happens in their personal life and it's just like, so that's what we've seen manifesting.
Yeah. And just quickly on that, I think it's easy for people to spot overwork. You notice when you're working long hours.
Yeah.
What do you think the signs for overwhelm are?
Yeah, I think the overwhelm, obviously more emotional kind of signs. I think the main one I would say is that you lose the joy for what you're doing. You stop, to your point, people love the work. You just stop loving what you're doing. And then the second step is you start to lose the tolerance and the patience for things. That's what I've kind of observed in terms of overwhelm. And you find yourself saying no more than you're saying yes. So that's what I would... or thinking it. Maybe you say yes, but you think no. Your immediate response becomes no. But really, you've lost the joy. And if you can get some of the joy or the passion or the excitement, whatever word you want to use, back into elements of your day, then you can recover and ride through it. And one of the things we talk about for people is finding that even in small parts of your day. And if you just introduce one thing, that brings a bit more joy into your day. It improves your well-being, and actually improving your well-being is what gets you through. If you focus on reducing stress, you actually just create more stress. You need to improve your well-being to get you through whatever the cycle is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing.
Mm.
Yeah, I think, we spend a lot of time, we talk about work-life balance a lot, and
But now we want to call it work-life integration. Mm-hmm.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
I took that from you.
Yeah, oh, good. That's amazing.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, because work and life aren't separate. It's a
No,
part of your
that's
life.
the
So
thing, right?
can you just tell us? I'm totally jumping in over
Yeah,
your
yeah,
leg, but
go
I
for
wanted
it,
to say, tell us work-life balance versus work-life integration.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
You know,
think
that switch.
Yeah, the work-life balance indicates to me certainly that it's a trade-off between one or the other. Like you need to sacrifice one for the other. You can't have both because balance is always going to be, like the scales, one will be more than the other, which I think is probably not a healthy way to look at it because we all work, a lot of us work, and most of us have to work financially, but some choose to work, and that's a part of your broader life. So if we follow the theory that talks about bringing your whole self to work, then work is a part of your life. And then you say,
Yeah.
well, then how do I manage this as part of my broader life? Because there's some great things we get from work. And if we talk about mental health, if someone's struggling mental health wise, actually being connected to people in a workplace is positive and can help them with their mental health. You don't want to be very isolated if you're starting to have mental health issues. So there's positives that come from work as well as all the pressure. So that's why I like to think about it in that sense.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I
That
think
makes
that's
sense.
a great distinction to have because, I think it's, sometimes we are enthusiastic and passionate, and maybe the thing we do want to do is just like work on this thing right now because it's like really exciting and interesting. Um, but yeah, I guess it's just like maybe one source of value and well-being in your life, and
Yeah.
maybe don't let it grow larger than the other sources
Yeah. Yeah.
of
Or
value and
it has
well-being.
a role to play with the others. And sometimes it will play more of a role or less of a role. I mean, I started this business. I used my work to try and make a difference in the world. So for me, being quite purpose driven and
Yeah.
wanting to do
Yeah.
something, that was the way I did it. I did the vehicle I chose was business and work. So for me, I do work a lot, but I'm working
Yeah.
because I'm trying to, create an outcome. So
Mm.
No, that's really great. Yeah, I guess we think about that a lot. We work with lots of teams who are external to us, and we're conscious of like putting them into situations where they're asked to deliver certain things in certain ways within certain times. And I guess we always want to be conscious that even though they're not our employees necessarily, that they're going into a situation that's not going to make their lives worse or terrible or be a source of overwork or overwhelm or major stress.
yeah.
But yeah, so it's good to hear about that, and the integration's a good angle
Yeah, thank you. I
on
think
that.
so.
Yeah.
I think if you're providing a space or an opportunity for people to come to you if they feel concerns, like, so it's safety really and
Yeah.
caring is so critical. And then people have a vehicle, like they have a pathway. I think when we start to get really, really challenged mentally is when we feel like we don't have a pathway, like all of our options are taken away from us. We lose control. So agency is so important as humans, but particularly as we're talking about work. So if they can come to you and raise some of the issues that they have, even with customers, and have the opportunity to talk to you about that, that creates a lot of mental safety for people, which really, prevents.
Is that like
burnout.
psychological safety? Is that the
Totally.
same thing?
That's
Yeah.
exactly what psychological and psychosocial safety is, really the ability to have an environment where you feel safe to speak up, safe to ask for help, safe to be yourself. So that's the core of it.
Yeah, and so with Indy, are you guys scaling psychological safety
Yes,
in workplaces?
that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, we are. We're scaling psychological safety and psychosocial safety, because psychosocial is kind of the team and the environment, and then the psychological safety is the individual. So yeah, absolutely, that's the intent of it. Be able to deliver it at scale, but also in a private and safe way, because I think that's important. If you're struggling, you're not going to go to your manager unless you feel that you're safe to.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, so based on your experiences and having Indy out there and Indy's learning all the time, for us having these conversations with teams and specialists out in the network, what are some of those signals or signs or words even
Yeah.
that could help us identify if someone is experiencing or burnout, or on the way to being burnt
Yeah.
out?
Well, other than using indie, which would be,
Yeah, yeah.
of course, the best thing to do. I would say there's a couple of things behaviorally as well as language wise. So when you start to hear language like hard, tough, stretched, you hear people talk a lot of time that they're crazy, and that's sort of time to start looking at, okay, if you're seeing that regularly, one off, it's fine. But if you're seeing it regularly, if every time you speak to someone and you ask them how they are and they're like, oh God, it's so much, that's what I would start to pay more attention to. I think behaviorally too, some of the things we see is that you're in Zoom meetings with people and they no longer put their camera on. Or they're sitting at their desk and they're like slumped at their desk, or they don't take breaks, like they're not going out and having lunch when everyone else goes out and has lunch. They're the sorts of things behaviorally I would be a little bit mindful of. I would be looking if they're sending messages or emails at 10, 11 o'clock at night routinely. You go, okay.
Yeah.
So they're probably the signs I would look for. And then also, how are they behaving in conversations? So that negative language, but are they not volunteering to do things?
Lots of no's.
Lots of no's, yeah. Not putting their hand up for things they would have been involved in before, not proactive.
Yeah.
And quiet. You see some people, like, I wouldn't say attack, but some people become very, like, aggressive almost. Others withdraw. And so if they're withdrawing and they're not saying anything and they're not doing much, and previously they would, then that's a sign. We look for changes in behaviour. Like, that's what Indie does. Indie baselines an individual, then looks for variations from that baseline. So I would suggest do the same in real life. What's the change from the behaviour that you used to?
Yeah, okay, that's really helpful. Now, we spoke earlier about, you touched on, going for lunch or those breaks in between meetings. I find in today's world, working remotely, you can just go from meeting to meeting to meeting, back to back all day, and all of a sudden you look at your calendar and you go, I didn't even get 5 minutes in the day. So I'm wondering, and Indy gives nudges, so is there something in there, does Indy say, at 1:30 or 2 p.m., hey, how was lunch?
Yeah. We did for a while, it did for a while. And then we took it out because not everyone has lunches at the same time. So that became challenging. Indy does two things. So one thing is, and I'll give you the tip right now, but Indy would give you the same tip. Microsoft and Google both have this facility where you could set a meeting for 5 minutes less than the time. So if you're setting a half an hour meeting, it books 25 minutes. If you're setting a 1 hour meeting, it books 50 minutes. And so we've switch to that. And so that's actually a tip that Indy gives everyone. And I give that tip to everyone.
I'm a huge advocate of that.
Yeah, and you've got to stick to it. So that's the thing. You've got to, like, at the 20-minute mark, you've got to start to wrap up. So that's one thing that we do, and Indy definitely does. The other thing Indy does is, because Indy sends nudges throughout the day, it sends you prompts which just cause you to think differently for a minute. Even if you don't do anything, if you just read it, your brain's gone in a and it's given your brain a little mental break for that period of time. So they're kind of the two ways that we do it through Indy.
Yep.
We're looking to say, can we start to build more of that stuff in? So we're trying to figure out, how do we do it when some people every day has lunch at different times. Yeah. One of the things we're looking at is, if you've been continuously working for like 3 hours, then we say, hey, is it time to... So we're looking at those sorts of things. But the other tip I would give, completely separately from Indy, having worked for a long time, is I block the time out in my diary. I could just put lunchtime in for 12 o'clock and it's just like a recurring meeting. I don't always stick to it, but at least it forces me to think about it. So some of those techniques work well.
No, it's good advice.
No, I put out of office sort of entries in my calendar that automatically reject meetings that come in over the top of them.
That's good.
A good idea.
That's good.
Like saying, hey, why you available? Not really.
Oh, that's a good idea. I haven't thought about that. That's the next step again. Oh, I love that. Okay.
Otherwise, people just book over the top.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's that recurring meeting. He's never in that one.
Ah, there you go. Well, we talk about it at the team though. Again, leading by example. I say, everyone, you have access to my calendar. You can see what's in there. I color code things so they can see things, and I'm transparent. This is my lunchtime, and this, like I said, I don't always stick to it, but I'm taking the kids somewhere. I'm a parent. I put all of it in my diary, and I'm very transparent. And I say to the team, please, if you want some time with me, have a look at my diary and ask. So I'll frequently have people say, this day looks crazy. Can we do something, or what do we do? And I'm like, okay, well, I'll move this, or let's put another day. So we kind of share that with each other, so we can all support each other in making healthy choices.
Yeah, and that's important, isn't it? That support.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier that Indy's learning all the time.
Yep.
Yeah. And so, like, the more people interact, the better, I guess, feedback and advice and suggestions and things like
Absolutely.
that
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
going to get.
So the AI approach that we have two, we have natural language processing, and we've had algorithms and an expert system. We'll keep the expert system, and then we're implementing machine learning
Yeah.
next year.
Yeah.
And so machine learning really learns all the time, continues to evolve. And we've now scored 1.7 million conversations over the last 5 years. So we've got
Wow.
we've got an amazing pool of
incredible.
data.
So good.
Yeah, and all different organisation sizes. So we've got a really good set of data. And we also give people the opportunity to respond to Indie. So thumbs up, thumbs down. So we know what people like, what
Yeah.
nudges do they like, what do they not like. And Indie can learn, okay, well, I'll present more of that. And so we've got all of that data, and
Well,
that's how it evolves.
That's awesome. And so, and you've been using AI technology from more or less the beginning, right?
Yeah,
That was the
right from
first
the
thing.
start.
It's been obviously a crazy year for in the AI world. Has that changed conversation? Have you noticed a difference in conversations that you have?
Totally. Oh my God, totally. So when we talked about AI, people thought
Yeah.
we were the Terminator. Honestly,
Yeah.
they would like, oh my God, you're going to take over the world. And I love the Terminator movies, especially the beginning. And I'm like, no, we're not going to be the Terminator. But now it's almost like since ChatGPT came along,
Yeah.
everyone sees AI as kind of warm and fuzzy, and they all want
Your friend.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
your friend. So in some respects, it's great because people are much more open to it. But in another respect, people are far too, I think, trusting of one part of AI. So that's generative AI. It's one part of AI. And it's pretty amazing, right? Like you can do some pretty amazing things, but it's not the only part. So people are going down the track of everything having to be Gen AI, and we use predictive AI and we use other sort of parts of AI. So there's pros and cons to it, but people are definitely more open. I do think though, because people are hopefully listening to this, one thing I would say as consumers we need to be really well aware of is the ethics and the responsible way it's been built. So I say to everyone on every panel that I'm on now, as a consumer of AI, you need to be asking what's going into this, like what are the ethics, how has this been trained, where's the transparency, because only as consumers, when we demand that, will we have organisations be accountable for creating responsible AI.
And how have you approached that internally at Pioneera?
So we've done that from the start. So Data 61, which is part of CSIRO,
Sorry, yeah.
had ethical AI principles back into 2018 when we started. So we
Yeah.
adopted those principles right from the start. So we make sure, AI doesn't do any harm. It's transparent. I was going to say transferable. That's wrong. It's transparent. It's helping do good. All the stuff that you would
Yeah.
expect. It doesn't have bias built into the system. So when we're doing our scoring, we make sure that we're using multiple people to score, and we're very deliberate on, okay, well, what's the age of the person and the gender of the person and all that sort of stuff. So we build all of that into our system, and then we make sure that we're super clear with what the AI is doing. As I said, the consent piece is really important. And we only present the data to those individuals. And we even keep it off-site. So if an organisation buys our product, all of the analysis that we've done is in our cloud. So a clever CTO can't hack in and get the data, which is what someone asked me in the beginning. So that's how we've approached it. And it's now paid dividends because companies go, oh, okay, well, you kind of get
For sure.
why
There's
this is
quite a
important.
strong awareness of that. now,
Yeah.
isn't there?
Very
there
strong
is.
awareness. Yeah, we won't sell the data to anyone. We don't license the data out. The only thing we do with the data is research. So we do research with the data, and we work with University of Sydney, RMIT, like well-established, respected research institutions.
It's
And
great
of
that you were
course, it's all
thinking like that
anonymised.
back in 2018 as well,
Yeah, yeah,
when you're embarking on this.
yeah.
I want to touch on a couple of things because you talk about ChatGPT, OpenAI, and the impact that's had. If you look back at 2018 launch, in 2021 you were recognized as a world-changing idea by Fast Company, and then in 22 you won the social impact category. So I look at those two, and then I think about, and then OpenAI came out and ChatGPT. Talk me through the changes to the business as you hit those three.
Yeah.
The first two awards, and then with ChatGPT.
Yeah, actually OpenAI approached us in 2019 to use some of our data. That's the first time we'd heard of them. We're like,
Wow.
who is this? Who is these people?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. They were on our radar right from the start. The awards were interesting because customers value the credibility that the awards provide to you. So when we could say we're a fast, world-changing idea,
Yeah.
all of a sudden people were like, oh, well, that's cool, because Fast Company is a very, respected publication. So
Yeah.
it provided us with a level of credibility. That and our first customer was ANZ. So those two things provided us with a huge amount of credibility. The Good Design Award was also quite interesting because whilst we believed we were doing socially good, purpose-driven things, that was a recognition of social impact and social good. So then all of a sudden investors that were investing in social impact and like sustainability teams and stuff in organizations that were looking at social impact were interested, because they're like, okay, this is an important, and the Good Design Awards are very much about product design. So it's less about the concept itself and it's more about the execution of the design. So they were interesting, opened up two different conversations. And then the Chat GPT is kind of just really brought every opportunity that we ever had to the fore. So Indy was originally a chatbot. We turned off the chat function because people didn't want it. Now everyone's asking us to turn on the chat function again. We're considering, would we build our own large language model for that? We will have LLMs for the other predictive stuff, and we'll hopefully give the ability to people to mine their own data through a chatbot next year, Indy next year. But doing an LLM, like a generative AI LLM, is hugely labor and time intensive and cost intensive, because, I was reading, Sam was saying the other day from OpenAI, the compute costs for them are eye-watering. And they've raised, $10 billion? And if it's eye-watering for them, what's it like for the rest of the world?
Yeah.
So it's cost prohibitive to do right now. So we're hoping to be able to do something like that in the future.
They gave nearly half the company to Microsoft to get the compute, really.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it does seem intimidating to get involved in that, and in a very hype-driven cycle around that technology. How do you, I guess, go about or think about like planning the future roadmap for that technology?
Yeah, so we're very customer driven. From day one, we co-create with our customers. We, get feedback from customers. So if customers are asking for it, which they are now,
Yes.
then we say, okay, this is something we should consider. So we do a little kind of 2x2 matrix in terms of, and it sounds really formal, but it's not. It's really conversations to say, well, if customers are wanting it, what's the value to them? What's the value to us? And then how feasible is it for us to do? And do we have to do it ourselves? So we've spent a lot of time building integrations into Slack, into Microsoft.
Yeah.
In hindsight, if I had my time again, I would have gotten someone else to do that, and I would have focused a lot more on the data, because that's actually what our core is.
Yeah.
So we now take that approach into, do we have to do that? So we're working with RMIT on building and testing the models, because that's their area of expertise, not ours. And we can work with you on that. So that's what informs the future roadmap and
How
how
long's the
we're
process
going
like
to get
that?
that.
Working with RMIT.
They've been amazing. RMIT have been very cool, because they have a research question that they want to answer.
Yeah.
So they want to answer the question about how they can do this.
I was wondering how that came about.
So we were connected to RMIT a couple of years ago. I can't even remember how we got connected to them. We meet so many amazing people. And Hatham, who we're working with, Dr. Hatham Fayek at RMIT, is ex-Meta when it was Facebook.
Yeah.
And he did amazing things. He really focuses on multimodal models, essentially, but also focuses on compromised. He calls it compromised data sets, which can be small data sets. And so if you're looking at anyone who's done anything in ML knows you need really big data sets. So we've always struggled to do that because our data set isn't big enough. And here comes along an amazing man who's just a great guy and is like, I think we can help you with a small data set. And then I think we can build a model for you or we'll test how do we build a model for you that has small enough compute power. So that's the research question
great. How good's that?
we've got. Yeah, and he's working with us on that, and then of course we'll take that and commercialize that with his permission, of course. So that has proven to be really effective. We're having conversations with Cyro doing the same thing to say, okay, there's something over here that we want to. So we've learnt how to partner, I think, a bit more effectively.
How was that research piece? So the work that RMIT are going to be doing.
How
with you?
long?
Yeah.
It originally was going to be 12 months, but now it will be 18 months because we're a small team and we had to do some stuff to get that sort of moving and took a bit of time to get that. So RMIT themselves moves quite quickly. We've worked with other universities that don't move so quickly, but they're
I mean, these things take time anyway.
They do.
Yeah.
They take time. Yeah. So I think with research, if you can find an organisation or an institution that is agile, moves quickly, but also the researcher understands that you want to commercialise the output, I think that's pretty important rather than it just being a research piece that can't be used.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So that's really great to hear about that. So I guess that collaboration as well going on, because it has those extended kind of benefits as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Because there's lots we want to bring in terms of further data sources too. So the chatbot is a way of engaging people with the system, but if we can get a better view of that individual and support that individual, with more data and different data, then we can support them. So there's lots of partnering we're looking to do in those areas too.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so is that just, coming back and maybe putting your founder of a startup hat back on? I'm sure it never comes off, but that particular part of it is, how do you manage the question around IP coming out of those kinds of collaborations?
Yeah.
Which are with these, universities or federal agencies, this kind of thing. And is there expectation around, Pioneera must somehow hold on to all the IP?
Yeah, it's interesting part of the founder journey, because I never considered that until we were talking to a large research institution, which is not one that we're working with now, back in 2019, and they had engineers that they were happy to loan out to startups to help the startups, get going when you didn't have a lot of capacity. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. You can give us an engineer. Thank you so much. And just somehow in the contract, I happened to see IP and I just drew my eye to it. But they would keep all the IP that the engineer, and I'm like, what? Like, that's our core IP. So thankfully I noticed it before I signed the contract. And then that became IP then raced to the top of my mind in terms of.
For sure.
So with most of the research institutions, you can negotiate IP. So we go straight into a conversation. Conversation I had yesterday with Cyro, a really good example where we straight up, let's talk about IP, and we talk about who's going to own what and what part of it, and then and then I come back to the team and we discuss what is important to us as a business, because essentially our IP is our value, and that's what our investors are investing in and expecting to grow. So we need to ensure that we have that IP in a way that we can commercialise. But with research institutions, they don't necessarily want the IP. They want to be able to do the research, publish the research, and continue in that area. So it is whilst you might do something together, you go into different directions. So I'm going to lose the microphone. I'm going to do the thing I was told not to do. You can go in two different directions, but it's important to be clear about the university will keep the research and use the research, and we will commercialise the output. So we do ensure that IP stays within our business.
Okay.
Yeah, really important.
It's very important, yeah. And for any startup founder listening, really important to hold on to your IP and hold on to your data. Because the other thing was, I had no idea back in 2018 how important data was going to be. So we were doing this because we were, helping people, and now we've got this data set. So the data's important as well.
Yeah, really, really, really interesting. I guess it's really encouraging to hear that you can do both things, access amazing, knowledge and experience in these other organizations, but you still not have to give up that, IP, because there are a lot of programs out there that invite data collaboration, right? Even if it isn't a way of necessarily grabbing IP, but out of a genuine desire to advance research and help answer research questions. And so knowing that you can do both things, I think is wonderful.
You have to be very deliberate and very careful about it, is what I would say. Because universities, and someone from a university said this to me, they love like collecting it, like they take it all, but then they don't do anything with it.
Yeah.
So you've got to be very, very clear and specific.
Okay.
Welcome in.
Hello, everybody.
I was trying to ping you guys, but
No,
neither of
this
you-
because this might be where my question was going.
Pardon?
I have a question that was leading into like, but you go.
Okay, go. So I wanted to ask, because I thought you were about to wrap up. I wanted to jump in. Your current market is very much in Australia, and looking at the customers that you currently work with, ANZ and the works. Obviously, the Australian market, in terms of openness to a lot of that, the way of working, work-life not balance integration, is a little bit more open to stuff like that. What are your thoughts around the scalability to the global market, considering countries like Japan, Korea, and even the States to a large extent, and how they're very, I guess, traditional, but also very aggressive in how they operate with people and the less care towards, I guess, work-life balance, etc.
Yeah. We primarily work in Australia, but interestingly are getting a lot of interest from overseas. So we did a course with the federal government actually as part of receiving a grant on purposeful international expansion. And the plan was we were going to, consider it and pilot, and we probably will still do that. But right now we've got proposals out in Canada, in London. We have a customer already in the Philippines, and we're talking to another person in the States. And we're probably about to do what every company says don't do, which is lots of bits there. But we're going to use all of those as test cases. London, the UK is interesting in Europe because they have the same approach to workplace laws as we have in Australia, and Canada has passed it. So New Zealand, Canada, and parts of Europe have already passed the same legislation in terms of psychosocial hazards. So they're
perfect.
perfect markets.
Yep.
So definitely, and we're using our ability to scale with a big client, a big customer, and we've got one now we're starting to scale with as a test case for, say, how would you scale internationally? So that's something that we're looking to. The States is interesting because obviously the States is like 51 markets. It's not one market.
Yeah.
And whilst people have made comments that they just work people into the ground and they don't really care about wellbeing, what we're hearing in the last 12 months is there's been a bit of a shift because they're starting to lose talent and because of the focus on ESG reporting. So there's a lot happening in the ESG space. And so that's created a bit of a conversation in the States to do things differently. And hybrid work's kind of thrown a massive spanner in the works. So people are looking for support.
Thinking, tying it back to what you said earlier around workers' compensation and the fact that people leave, and if they do leave based on stress, it's on average 26 weeks, which is really costly. Is that an angle that you've looked at in other countries? So you think America, for example, even though, yes, there's this belief that they get worked into the ground, is there data out there that says, well, actually, X% of the workforce takes leave because of stress, and then therefore that's an opportunity for Pioneera to be coming and saying, well, you know what, we can reduce that by...
Yeah, absolutely. There is some data, I think, that says 33% of people will take an extra week off a year due to stress. So the opportunity for the states we'd probably look at some sort of partnership, maybe with an employee benefits or an insurer, because that's the thing. The upshot for them is reducing the premiums, and we're talking to insurers in Australia for the same reason. So that would probably be the way that we would do it. But yeah, they're definitely interested. The thing with insurance, though, is interesting, and my background is insurance, is that insurance is often hidden in the P&L, so it's not an obvious way for people to reduce costs.
Who owns it? So here in Australia, if you're talking about workers' compensation, who's looking at that number in a large organisation?
That's
Is it
a
HR?
very good question. Sometimes it's HR. Sometimes it's employee relations, or because they're then maybe flow-on effects. Sometimes it's finance. Sometimes it's safety. So it varies depending on. Sometimes they don't even know. Like I've asked companies, and they're like, "Oh, that's a very good question." So it's not the obvious line item just yet. What's more obvious in terms of savings is sick leave, turnover, that sort of stuff. That's
attrition.
Traditional HR kind of obsessions, right?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good question, Chris. Thank you.
Anything else?
What's your target industries at the moment? So obviously you can be focused on all companies of all sizes. But are there obvious sectors that you are looking at and saying, we can really shift the dial?
Yeah, where we typically focus is organisations that have a higher propensity or proportion of knowledge roles that are working in a hybrid way, usually very highly skilled technical people. And so if you lose those people, it's a long time to get a new person up to speed. So, developers, claims claims officers, so people that
Really?
work claims, that sort of stuff. Services, people that provide services, return to work services if you're a provider that helps people get back to work, because they're highly skilled, specialised roles that have right now a very shallow, I call it, talent pool. So if you lose someone in that space. So they're typically the industries that we work with. So professional industries, service-based industries, technology industries we work a lot with. We work a lot with finance.
Yep.
So they, work in all of those ways. Knowledge roles, hybrid working, highly skilled, shallow talent pool. So that's where we get quite a bit of demand.
Yeah, okay. And working with a company like ANZ as a starting point, it must have been amazing. What are the other banks doing?
Oh, so funny. I think all the other banks are aware of the challenge. So we've spoken to most of them. And again, good people with good intent in all of the banks, I have to say. The challenge then comes down to two kind of things. Firstly, they're already doing a lot of stuff.
Yep.
They're not necessarily doing the stuff in our area. So the conversation with banks, not just banks, but big organisations has become, well, let's map what you're doing, right? So it's almost a bit like a puzzle.
Yeah.
Put a puzzle together for them and say, well, here's all the stuff that you're doing. Here's the overlap, but here's the gap. And as soon as they see the gap, they're like, ooh, okay. So that's the one thing that I would say. The second thing then is most large enterprises, not just banks, are set up to be safe and secure. And so to implement a new technology in a big organisation takes some time. And so we're looking at, from a tech point of view, how we can make that easier. So what permissions we have in the system and how it all works. And then also helping organisations themselves navigate that. One pilot we did with a large organisation took them 2 years to get approval through technology and HR, and the person who was the champion was like literally banging on doors for that period of time. So we support that individual as much as we can.
Yep.
What is good is that organisations are starting to realise that they need something and they're trying to fast track processes. And as soon as you throw risk, I throw the word risk in a conversation, they're like, oh, hang on.
Yes.
We have an urgency here.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
so
we're in
that's
trouble
how
if we
we're
don't
doing
pay
it.
attention to that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
And people now are talking about AI, especially in a business context around productivity improvements and
That's right.
what can we do quicker and better.
Yeah.
So with something like Pioneera, I like to refer to it as indie. So,
Yes.
Bringing indie in, and you talk about overlaps, is there a conversation that you're having around, well, you currently do all of these things, but if you had indie, you can remove some of this stuff. So that productivity improvement, because
Interesting.
you've got the AI component.
Maybe not so much. I think I need to bring you into my sales team, Josh. Good question. Not so much. I think that's probably the next step. We focused more on what we could augment in terms of utilisation of existing tools, so wellbeing and EAP programs mainly. But we haven't necessarily talked about what else we could remove for them from a productivity perspective. So I think that's a good question.
Because it seems like the chat that's happening now around AI is a lot of it's around productivity.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it sounds like with all the knowledge you have now, pushing Pioneera into organisations, the adoption of that. So it seems
Certainly
like
we
a good
measure
conversation to have.
productivity. The measurement of productivity is like almost the first thing we start talking about, because when companies are implementing all the new AI, particularly like the ChatGPT or Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, a few people looking at, they want to know the productivity uplift. And all of the literature is saying 40%, 50%, 60%, which is just massive.
It's huge.
It's wild.
And they're like, well, is that really possible? So they're a little bit skeptical. So what our tool can do, what Indy can do, and our positive productivity score, it can give them a measure.
Yeah.
So it can, and that's what we're talking to lots of organisations about. Let's do it here before you implement the AI, and let's do it again and see what the productivity uplift actually is for your organisation.
Yeah, it's the double-sided productivity. It's the use Indy and your people are more productive, and then also use Indy and you have to do less of the
That's right.
The other stuff.
The other stuff, yeah.
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 The third thing for the banks, I guess, in particular, but again, large organisations, is their boards want ESG measures. They need
Yep.
to be reporting. They've put a huge amount of effort into the E, everyone has,
Yep.
but
Yeah.
not a lot into the S. So we're seeing the market now swing more towards S and say, well, what are the S measures that we can put into place? And
Wow.
where we're seeing productivity, I guess,
Yes.
you talk about productivity gains, they have sustainability or HR teams pulling together reams of Excel spreadsheets to say this is what our position is on well-being or engagement
Yeah.
or turnover.
I was-
And we're like, oh my God, that's insane. You know, you could have a number here that just tells you and
I was going to
demonstrates
say,
well-being
it's
and productivity.
Yeah, exactly that.
Mm.
How it's so interesting that productivity is so loosely kind of measured.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
before
yeah.
you're turning up and sort of like doing that.
Yeah. Well, it's hard for knowledge roles because
Yeah.
the traditional measures of productivity is how much you've done.
Yeah.
So
It's
if
like
you're
the
a
throughput.
It is
Yeah,
totally,
yeah,
which
yeah.
applies, if you're in a contact center or you're a bricklayer or something, you go,
You
okay.
can do it. Yeah.
But most of the roles most knowledge roles don't have that end point at the end of every day to measure. So that's why they don't measure it, because it's actually really hard to measure.
Yeah.
And we've taken 2 years to design this instrument, which we're about to then go and, design further with one of our university partners to really measure that knowledge role in terms of productivity and well-being. And we look at the things you'd expect, like satisfaction and engagement and leadership and purpose and challenge. Challenge is really important to mental, performance and flow state. We measure flow state and resilience. But the big thing also we measure is safety. So what's the psychosocial safety? And what's the good stress for that particular individual? So we're putting all of that together in a really unique way at an individual and team level. And that's how we measure productivity.
Wow. And I'm curious, do you have to do I'm kind of curious because I imagine a lot of people will have like their own kind of idea of what productivity is
Yeah.
and their own way of like
Yeah.
measuring it.
Yeah.
Like, oh, Luke isn't at his desk, unproductive. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So do you have to do a bit of, I guess, selling or education or convincing around looking at productivity in that way?
We do, because you're right. People measure it in very different ways. So
Yeah.
that's one of the things we do with this tool. We talk about what is productivity, and we have done a piece of research with the University of Sydney that interviewed people about productivity at multiple levels. So, senior people, middle people, and people doing the roles to understand how they thought about and measured productivity in the absence of productivity measures. So we've got some really interesting data for that. But the other thing we do is we link productivity to risk. So my point about risk before,
Yeah.
with our positive productivity score, the higher the score, the lower the people risk you have. The lower the score, the higher risk you have to your people.
Yeah.
And so we educate them on productivity itself, but also the potential impacts of productivity.
It's like the Pioneera Productivity Index.
Pretty much, yeah. We call
Oh,
it.
is that coming?
Well, we call it the positive productivity score. We call it PPS. So we believe that the way people are measuring productivity now, it's toxic, like it's toxic productivity. And so we want to steer people towards positive productivity. So the product has been modelled on the Net Promoter Score.
Yep.
It's been
Yeah.
very effective at helping change, it's changed the whole focus of customer. And so what we're trying to do is do the same here, change the whole focus of wellbeing and mental health to be actually a commercial outcome for a business. And that commercial outcome is productivity. So that's the design of the product and how we use it as well.
Wow.
Awesome.
Yeah. I was wondering, but do you see like in the future, like a positive productivity index? Like,
Yes.
this organization,
Yeah.
this organization, this, and that.
Absolutely.
When employees, I'm applying for a job, I'm going to choose the one with the high
Yeah,
index.
totally.
Standard measure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
what we're wanting to do. That's why we're creating it as an ESG measure.
Yeah.
So, and we're doing next year. We're inviting companies in actually. So if anyone wants to be part of it, we're inviting them in to work with ourselves and our research partners to actually validate this instrument that we're building, and we can then use it as a baseline. We can use it as a benchmark for Australia. We'll have an Australian positive productivity score.
Yeah.
And then we can look at a global positive productivity score, which then would be a part of the S. And then you've got a playing field that everyone can kind of aspire to.
So how do you get it to become the standard? How do you get it to become what is it, like the green tick? Is that what we used to have?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good question. So the first thing that we're doing is, again, partnering with a respected research institution, because if you've got a solid base behind it, people are going to find it much more credible. But really, it's going to be usage. So how many people buy it, how many people use it, because that brings credibility. One thing I know about organizations is they have a lot of FOMO. So you talk about the banks, if someone's doing this over there, then they're all doing that. I better jump on board. Yeah. So I think bringing those organizations on, and you don't have to use, Indy gathers the data, but also it's right now a standalone survey. So it's a super simple way for people to get started. And that's helped large organizations as they go through the tech assessment or the tech approvals. So that's, I think, the way of doing it. Then we'll start talking to maybe the ASX and other, SASB and GWI, the global benchmarks for ESG, to say, well, how do we get this as something that you recommend? The government puts forward. Australia doesn't actually have an ESG standard that they expect everyone to deliver to. We use different ones. So if we get to the point of having a standard,
you can change that.
We would like to put it in there. We'll do our best. We'll do our best. We'll do our best.
Amazing. I'm looking around.
No more bets.
I'm super conscious that we're over time. I'm getting anxious about time on your behalf. Danielle.
Oh, good. I'm just getting hungry. That's the thing I'd say. Yeah.
This has been really interesting and a great chat.
Yeah,
thank you.
It really is. It's good to hear about, I guess, such a purpose-driven company just doing great work. Is there anywhere that people should go online to find out more about what you do or around these issues?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you come to our website, which is Pioneera, Pioneera.com. I'm one of those crazy people that put two words together. A lot of this information is on our website. So we have a resources section where we have research, and we've written a lot of blogs on this, so you can easily find the information that you need. So absolutely jump on there. We're also on LinkedIn, of course. So Pioneera Group on LinkedIn. Again, we post quite a bit on there so people can use the knowledge that we've acquired. We have no interest in keeping it to ourselves. Just, message me on LinkedIn, Danielle Owen Whitford, if you want more information, and we'll share.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's amazing. It'd be great for people to find out more and also maybe to start a conversation.
Please do. Well. Yeah, please. And we're always open to ideas and feedback, and because some of the greatest things that we've done in the system have come from our customers and from conversations with potential customers. So reach out.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. It's been great. I've enjoyed it.